Okay, all seems to be good and running now. So, hello everybody. Welcome. Happy Friday. Want to say welcome to our second and final webinar in our free Stronger Together webinar mini-series in honor of May Mental Health Awareness Month. Stronger Together is Dairy Girl Network's mental health initiative and our way to open the door to conversations, resources, and support regarding all things mental wellness for those in the dairy industry and beyond. If you're new to our Enhance webinar program, DGN offers almost monthly webinars that are open to the public. Men and women are welcome, but of course, DGN members get some special perks like a free webinar on your birthday month or around your birthday month. So if you aren't a DGN member, I encourage you to go sign up at dairygirlnetwork.com and you can click the little join button. It's really fast, it's free, and it's easy, and it'll keep you in the loop with all things Dairy Girl Network too beyond webinars. So I'm Amanda Borkowski. I am the DGN staff lead for these Enhanced webinars and also our Stronger Together initiative. I'm going to kick off today with just some housekeeping, some announcements, and then I will hand it over to Josie for her presentation. So to start, I also want to give a really special thank you to Zoetis for providing the web hosting and recording for all of our Enhanced webinars in 2025. And then a couple of notes about interacting today. Throughout the webinar, we really encourage you to use the chat feature to ask questions and leave comments. And I know Josie's really excited to interact with you this way as well. You can also unmute yourself and ask your questions along the way that way. If you're worried about interrupting or not quite sure when to interject, there is a raise hand feature you can use that will kind of alert us, and either somebody here on the DGN team or Josie herself will be able to build space for you to interact and ask your questions throughout the webinar. And if you'd rather wait, there will be a dedicated time for Q&A at the very end of the webinar, but Josie really wants you to ask questions throughout the presentation. So also, I know we may touch on some more delicate topics today. So if you would prefer to remain anonymous when asking a question, please just direct message me your question in the chat, and then I will ask the anonymous question. So finally, something that we also really like to do during these webinars is build a community. And with that, we really do love being able to see you during these webinars, and our presenters really appreciate it too. So if you're able and you're comfortable, we really do welcome you to join with your video on. Whether you're in the barn or in the office, hair up, down, nobody cares. This is a safe space. And you can definitely join without judgment and truly be a part of today's conversation. And then just a couple of DGN announcements that I want to share. Besides these webinars, we are really committed to having conversations around mental wellness all month long for May. So if you aren't in our private Facebook group called Exchange by Dairy Girl Network, I really encourage you to join. We'll put a link in the chat, but if you're signing up, make sure you answer all the questions just so our admins can get you in. But this Facebook group has over 5,500 highly engaged dairy women, and every month there are a ton of organic conversations, everything from sharing wins, asking questions, looking for recipes, looking for ways to improve your dairy business, fun stuff. This group has it all. And this month, especially for May Mental Health Awareness Month, we have been tapping into our expert, Monica Kramer-McConkey, who is a rural mental health specialist. And so in the group this month, she's going to be a little extra active and bringing you thoughtful activities, as well as just being a resource that you can tap into with questions and concerns. So definitely check that out. And then one more Stronger Together piece I want to share with you is our resource hub. There is a tab on our website that is available all year long, not just in May, that is a great link for you to favorite and save. We're throwing it in the chat so you can check it out, but this hub has links for phone numbers, organizations, articles, websites, and more, all related to mental wellness of our farming community. And it's a really great tool to explore now and just kind of keep handy and in your back pocket if you may ever need that information for yourself or to share. So definitely check that out. All right, before I introduce you all the way, Josie, let's make sure that you are set to go. Awesome. I'll go ahead and read your bio, but I can see your screen and it looks fabulous. So Josie Rudolphi is an assistant professor and extension specialist at the University of Illinois. Her research and outreach efforts have focused on describing the stress and mental health experience of agricultural populations, including farmers, ranchers, their families, and farm workers. She directs the North Central Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Center, which is a 12-state, 19-partner collaborative funded by USDA and IFA that expands stress assistance and mental health programming to people engaged in agricultural occupation. And that's just a little bit of what Josie does. So I'm sure she'll talk a little bit more about that. But Josie, I think we're ready. I will hand it off to you for your presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you to the Dairy Girl Network for having me. Thank you all for making a little time in what I know are busy schedules to be here today. I hope that this is a educational and informational webinar. I hope we are able to have a little bit of fun as well. As Amanda mentioned, the chat is open, and I look forward to engaging with you in the chat, learning from you all. I'm hoping I've planted a few questions. I hope we're able to share some tips and tricks, things that work for us, things that other people may benefit from in terms of managing our mental health and wellness, not just for ourselves, but also our families. But with that, I do ask that you be respectful and helpful in the chat. I do a lot of webinars with young people, college students, and even younger. And so it's always a good reminder to make that the chat is an open public space, but we're hopeful that it will be a really productive space as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'm gonna see that I can move my screen here. So as Amanda mentioned, I'm an assistant professor and extension specialist at the University of Illinois. I think I have one of the best jobs in the world. I get to work with students that are really interested and passionate about agricultural safety and health, people who are thinking about really innovative initiatives to improve the mental health of farmers, farm workers, farm families. I get to travel the state as an extension specialist, talking with farmers and farm workers and stakeholders about what their needs are, how we may work collectively to, again, improve the mental health status of people who are in agriculture and agricultural occupations. But I joke, my dean does not think it's funny when I say that my job at the University of Illinois is like my side gig, because I also farm with my family in Eastern Iowa. I grew up on a corn and soybean farm and a hog farm for a while in Eastern Iowa, and I stay as engaged as possible. And so I split my time between Iowa and Illinois. I split my time between a desk and usually a tractor cab or a combine cab, or doing, as you all know, the many other never-ending tasks that are required of farm work. This is a photo from this first photo, I should say, the photo on the my left is from about 1990. My brothers and my father are standing in front of a brand new tractor, the first one that had ever been on the farm. You can see there's a red bow up near my older brother. I'm sure you all have photos like this or similar photos to this in your photo albums, for those of us that still have photo albums, or on our desks or on our walls. And I think this really speaks to one thing we're going to talk a little bit about today, which is how agriculture is a little unique in that it's a family business. And we're going to talk about how we really appreciate that, but how that can create some challenges. We'll talk about sort of the people in the space. You can see there's two generations there. Me and my brothers are now thinking about what the farm's going to look like when my parents are no longer involved. And the photo on the right is much more recent. This is one of my favorite jobs, driving the auger wagon. I don't get to do it very often, but if I get to be out in the auger wagon during harvest, that is certainly the job I prefer to, even though I think my job at Illinois is really great. If I can be outside working with my hands, that's where I would prefer to be, as I'm sure most of you would agree. So now I ask a question of you. What do you think are some of the best parts of farm life? And so I'm really excited again to be interacting via the chat. I'd love to hear where you're from, where you're tuning in from today, and then also what you consider to be some of the very best parts of farm life. For me, I really enjoy being outside. And I should say, obviously besides the money, what are some of your favorite or the things you appreciate about farm life the most? For me, I really appreciate being outside. I really like working with my hands. I love seeing, um, we are entirely crop production now, so I love seeing crop go in the spring, watching it throughout the summer, hoping that everything goes okay, and being able to harvest, hopefully, sort of the fruit of our labor at the end of the year. Laura says, being your own boss, you cannot beat that. The autonomy that farmers have, the ability to do the work when they want to do it. Obviously, there are external pressures there, but we certainly have some flexibility and a lot of autonomy. Being outside working with animals, animals are so. I don't have any animals. I guess I have a cat and a couple of chickens, but yeah, working with animals, people really the human animal bond is really therapeutic and important. Freedom of our work schedules and having family nearby. Oh, we're going to talk more about that, Jennifer, the value in having family nearby. Certainly seeing the fruits of our labor. There's a lot of variety to the day. I can appreciate that as well. I typically am at the computer from, 8 or so until about 3 p.m. And by that point, I just have to get up. I have to do something else. I'm excited to go out to the garden, go out to the farm, be doing something else. Excellent. Well, thank you all for sharing that. I really appreciate your input there. And my next question is, what are some of the more challenging parts of farm life? I think for everything we like about the farm, there might be something that's a little challenging. It's great to be our own boss. It's great to have the autonomy to do what we want when we want to do it. But then we also probably feel there's a lot of pressure. There's time pressures. I hear from farmers constantly talking about how they never feel like there's enough time to get everything done. And the variety, somebody already mentioned the variety of tasks keeps us busy and it keeps our mind really engaged. And we don't get bored, but with that, we have to be sort of, I've heard farmers talk about how they have to be a mechanic, they have to be an agronomist, they have to be a marketing expert, they have to be a banker of sorts, they have to be a veterinarian. It demands a lot of us. It's very hard to get away. Jennifer, I would like thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up that. Having grown up on a farm, I remember how complicated vacations were. And we were always sort of driving places because that's what we do in the Midwest. But it was always kind of, our travel schedule was always dependent on when the beans needed sprayed. So we might leave a day later than we thought because we need to finish up spraying. We might come home a day early because we know there's some sort of weed pressure. So we know it's very, very challenging to get away, especially if you have livestock. I think I spent 2 years up in central Wisconsin working, and dairy farmers are, I think, among the hardest working farmers there are. And the inability to get away from that is really, really challenging. And of course, the lack of control, the weather, the markets. It's really interesting when I talk to people who have no really perspective or experience in farming. And I ask questions like, do you get a consistent paycheck? Do you get paid every month? Because a lot of farmers don't. Do you know what your paycheck's going to be? Because a lot of farmers don't. Do you have sick leave? Do you have paid time off? Because those are, luxuries that farmers don't always enjoy. And so, like I said, while there are certainly great parts of farm life, we really enjoy it. There's so many advantages. We also know that there are some situations that create some challenges. And I don't need to tell you all this, but when we talk to farmers, whether it be from surveys or focus groups, a couple of things we often hear is that there's a ton of stress, and there's a lot of stress around personal finances. People talk about the weather, the changing climate. People talk about sort of larger economic issues that have unforeseen sort of creating maybe unexpected situations for people. People in DC and other parts of the world who are making decisions that are going to impact our farms and our farm families. We hear a lot about interpersonal relationships. So I mentioned that I farm with my parents and my siblings. And while we certainly have, I think, the opportunity to be so close with your family and to get to work with your family has its advantages, we also know that it has some disadvantages. And unfortunately, research has demonstrated that there's also a very strong association between these agricultural stressors that I just mentioned and adverse mental health conditions. So among adults who report high levels of personal, like financial stress, economic stress, and stress around the environment and stress around people are more likely to experience symptoms of anxiety and depression. We've also found through some of our more recent work, which has not been published yet, farmers and farm parents who report what we would consider adverse economic conditions, so perhaps a significant change in income from one year to another, typically significantly less. People who feel like they don't have enough to make ends meet, people who have more debt than asset, are also reporting more symptoms of anxiety and depression. And if you know anything about farm finances, you know that there's inconsistencies in terms of pay. There are a lot of financial conditions that are completely out of our control. And those are contributing to a lot of stress among farmers and farm parents. But I also really want to talk about the other people in the environment. And we know that the farm is not only a business, but it's also a residence. And we know there are about 2 million young people under the age of 18 who are living and working on farms, who are experiencing a lot of the same sorts of stressors that their adult counterparts might be experiencing. Growing up on a farm, we are the boardroom and the kitchen table were the same place. And so we talked a lot about the farm. We still talk a lot about the farm over dinner, of course, over most meals, but also over, Easter Sunday, we're still talking about the farm. So it's really, really difficult for farm families to escape that. And this is something I found, this might be a little bit hard to see, but I think it really sort of demonstrates how close that farm and home space is. So this is a piece of scrap paper I found in my dad's desk. So I have the luxury of working on our, excuse me, from this desk that used to be my dad's sort of farm desk. So I was cleaning it out one day trying to make space for my stuff, and I found this scrap of paper, and you can see it's a lot of math. I think it's probably crop insurance calculations or something similar. And I remember the house just being, full of papers that people had jotted down numbers, and you never knew if it was important or you could throw it away. And it was just my dad's sort of chicken scribble all over everything. And I turned it over, and on the back side is my little brother's Christmas list. And so again, it's just how there's really no separation between home and farm, especially at least in our house, I should say. And this has some really important impacts for young people, children who are growing up on farms. And it's led to a research project that I'm doing, and I'm not going to go into intense detail about the family stress model, and I think it's rather intuitive, but the family stress model was developed at Iowa State University in like the early 1990s, post the 1980s farm crisis. And what this model demonstrates is that family economic pressure results in parents' emotional distress and behavioral problems, which then has an impact on, the farm couple or partnership, in that the people tend to be a little less loving, a little less nurturing in partnerships, and also engaging in what we might consider less ideal types of parenting. So they may be a little bit more harsh, they may be more uninvolved. And these have important impacts on child's emotional and behavioral health problems. And we've seen this in some of our research that we're doing now, is that when parents report a lot of economic stress, they report relatively poor mental health. And unfortunately, the children in that household are also reporting poor mental health. And so it's really, I think, underscores the importance of having resources. We have a lot of resources right now. We're having a lot of important conversations about farm stress and mental health. But I think it's really, really important that we acknowledge that there are a lot of people in this space. There are spouses, partners, in-laws, children, grandchildren, who are not immune or naive to what might be happening on the farm. And we talk about mental health specifically. I have 2 slides with some statistics on here. And these are layered, and there's a lot behind these numbers, we certainly acknowledge. This is just a little bit of a snapshot. We talk about the plight of farm families when it comes to anxiety and depression specifically. In general, we know that farmers experience worse mental health than the general population. The bottom row there is the prevalence of anxiety and depression that we see among US adults. So these are statistics that are typically dated. Comparisons are very hard to make, but in general, we say at any given point, about 20% of the population is experiencing anxiety, and I would say 7.3 is more dated. We have more recent data. It's probably closer to about 15%. So among the US general population, about 18% meet the criteria for anxiety, and about 12 to 15% meet the criteria for depression. Now, when we look at farmers, the next row up, studies that I've been a part of, that my colleagues have been a part of, we're finding double or almost triple the proportion of farmers meeting the criteria for anxiety and for depression. So you can see the range for anxiety is anywhere between 27 and 71%. What we're seeing in terms of depression is a range from 6 to about 50%. Now, you might be saying, like, Josie, what's with this huge range? And I would say that's a very good question. When we have, you can see I have a number of citations below, but when we talk about farmers, those are a number of different studies that have been done, different times of the year, different years, different priority populations. And so this is sort of an aggregate of all of those different studies. So one study reports as low as 27%, and another study among young adult farmers reports as high as 70% are meeting the criteria for anxiety. Now, the next row up is farm parents specifically. So I mentioned we have a study going on right now that's looking at sort of the shared stress and mental health experience of farm families. So in that study specifically, we found that almost 55% of our farm parents met the criteria for anxiety, and 60% met the criteria for depression. Which again, when we compare that to the general population, it's 2, almost 3 times higher, which is quite concerning. What I think is also concerning is when we look at farm youth. So for every farm parent that I mentioned on the previous slide, we have data on a youth in the household. And what we find is that about 45% of our farm youth in our study met the criteria for anxiety, and just over 60% met the criteria for depression. And again, when you compare that to what we know about the US youth population, again, it's substantially higher. You can see that we expect about 32% of young adults, or I should say youth under the age of 18, to meet the criteria for depression, and about 18% or 17%, excuse me, meeting the criteria for depression. I think I mixed that up. 31% meeting the criteria for anxiety, and 17% meeting the criteria for depression. And what we find with adolescents and adults from farms is there's a very strong relationship between parents and youth. So that statistical relationship, if a farm parent reports anxiety and or depression, it is highly likely, strongly correlated, that farm youth is also going to meet the criteria for anxiety and depression. Again, suggesting there's a lot happening that's highly related. There's a lot happening in the farm household. So with that, I'm going to transition into a couple of different resources that we have available, things we're working on in the Midwest. I acknowledge maybe you are not necessarily from the Midwest. You may be joining from somewhere else, in which case I hope to have some tips and tricks also for you. But one thing I really like to do is show the mental health spectrum. And I think this is really important because we need to normalize mental health. We all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. Some days we may be really thriving and feeling amazing, and other days we may be struggling or perhaps even in crisis. So I would ask you to read through each of these, check in with yourself, sort of identify where you are on this spectrum today. You don't need to put this in the chat. This is something that's just sort of for your own self-reference. But I do think it's good to be able to check in with yourself every once in a while. Maybe reflect on the past month. Were there days or even maybe a week at a time when you felt like you were struggling or maybe bordering into crisis? What was going on during that time? How were you able to move out of struggling and maybe into surviving and perhaps even into thriving? Similarly, were there days or weeks, hopefully, that you were feeling like you were really excelling in your mental health? And again, asking yourself, what was going on then? What things can I be doing to sort of promote my own mental health? Um, we're hopeful that today we'll fill our toolbox with a couple of things that might be helpful. But I think this visual is a really great tool for checking in. And I'd love to have this on like magnets and have them in shops and in kitchens. And I think this is a really great tool to also use with children or adolescents because it's very visual. It's something you can ask about maybe over dinner. You can ask about it in the morning. You can start conversations about how you're feeling and where you might be on the spectrum. And then, excuse me, acknowledging that we're always able to move through the spectrum. I think one concern is that if I say I'm struggling today, I may never be able to come out of that. But this is a fluid spectrum. We're constantly moving throughout it. It's unrealistic to think that we're going to be excelling every single day. And we want to also think that it's unrealistic that somebody has to live in crisis. So again, I think this is a really good tool. It's something I use to check in with myself, ask how I'm feeling, try to match emotions to the different words that are displayed there, and then I can sort of identify where I might be and if there are things I need to do to sort of activate, hopefully, a change. Today I'm going to talk about, and Amanda's mentioned this, but a lot of the initiatives that we're going to talk about are supported through the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Networks. So these are 4 regional centers that are funded by USDA with the intent to really increase attention on farm stress and mental health resources. So these programs were authorized by the 2018 Farm Bill, and I don't have to tell you all that we are waiting, maybe not so patiently, on another Farm Bill, but we're hopeful that these sorts of initiatives will be continued to be supported in our next Farm Bill. But in 2018, this authorized funding for 4 regional centers. We're going to talk specifically about the North Central region today, but you can see if you're not from the Midwest or the North Central region, you can hopefully find which region might be considered your regional home. And I'll have contact information for the other regional leads towards the end of the presentation, so that if you are curious about something or you need a specific resource or you'd like to get connected with that project director, you'll have that information available. So my colleague and I direct the North Central Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Center. As Amanda mentioned, we are a 12-state, 19 different partners that are working to expand farm stress and mental health resources to farmers, ranchers, agricultural workers, people engaged in agricultural occupations, and of course, farm families. So we operate with these sort of 5 major focus areas, which I'm going to talk about each of those and some of the initiatives and resources that are available through each of those as we progress here throughout today. So the first place we're working in is helplines and websites. I know helplines are not for everybody. Some people love the idea of calling an anonymous hotline. Others, like myself, for example, I don't really like to talk on the phone very much, but we do know that there are text lines available as well as email lines. And so there are a couple of here listed. The Concern Hotline is a 24-hour agricultural specific line. It's available to anybody in the US. It was developed in the, excuse me, out of the 1985 farm, or I should say the 1980s farm crisis. It's a place where people can call to get legal advice, some financial advice, of course, crisis intervention, and you can be connected to local resources. It's a fantastic line. It responds to over 10,000 calls a year. It was originally developed in Iowa. It's still run by Iowa State University Extension, but they partner with the 211 lines, which make it possible to connect you to local resources. So if you're calling from somewhere besides Iowa, you'll still be connected to some local resources. The Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 988. We have a couple of youth-specific lines, which I think are very helpful to have either in your phone or on a wallet card. All of these are available at farmstress.org. And if you're interested in wallet cards, please reach out to me. We are in the business of mailing these cute little cards that on the front they say need an ear. In the back, they have a number of what we would recommend, our recommended hotlines, though they're not use specific. We have the concern line on there. We have the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. We have a couple details about other crisis and text lines. And then we also have the Farm Aid hotline on there. Sorry about that. I have something in my throat. But again, if you would appreciate or you could benefit from a stack of these wallet cards, we find this to be a really sort of passive way of offering support. So somebody maybe is expressing to you that they're feeling a lot of stress, they have some anxiety around maybe it's farm finances or they need some legal advice. A really passive, non-invasive way to offer the support is say, you know what? I don't have a lot of experience with X, Y, or Z, but I have this card and I know that there's some great resources on here. And I highly recommend, the concern hotline. They can help you through some of those ag specific concerns. Or you know what? You're saying I'm kind of concerned about what you're saying. I don't feel like I'm an expert, but I do know that there are some really great resources on this card, and I'd love to leave this with you. Whoa. Now I'm going to the website. We do invite you to visit farmstress.org. All of the things I'm talking about today can be found there. We consider that our regional clearinghouse of all sorts of things farm stress and mental health related. Another thing I want to talk about are training programs. So we offer a number of training programs. And the goal behind these is to really raise awareness about various mental health conditions, work to reduce stigma, help people connect with local referrals, and build confidence and skills in intervening should you be concerned about somebody in your community. The goal for these programs is to really train non-mental health providers to be a bridge between somebody in crisis and professional services or referral. So a couple of programs that we offer are mental health first aid, youth mental health first aid, communicating with farmers under stress, and weathering the storms. And these programs are available in person or online. They talk about a lot of different topics. Some are very specific for farmers. Some are more specific for people who support farmers. But if this is a program that you're interested in, please contact our program coordinator. Her name is Stephanie. She can help guide you to where some of these programs may be hosted and available. Like I said, across the 12 states, most of these programs are going to be available at no cost to you. It's just a matter of connecting you with an organization that might be hosting it. One thing I really like about these programs is it really starts to normalize conversations around mental health, but also helps to increase awareness about common signs and symptoms. And so I'm going to go through a couple of the things that some of these training programs will touch on that I think are really valuable, even if we're not able to participate in a course. And so one is really being able to acknowledge signs in other people or perhaps symptoms in yourself. And so a lot of times we think we know what depression and anxiety look like. I grew up in the 90s, and there was a Zoloft commercial, which is an antidepressant medication, highly effective. And it was a cartoon of like this, it looked like kind of like a soybean. I don't think that's what it was supposed to be, but it sort of bounced through life and it was very sad looking and it had a rain cloud over it the whole time. So it's going through life, it's going to work, it's going home. And I just thought, oh, that's depression. That's what it is. And I just assumed that if I saw somebody and they were depressed, that they would have this like dark cloud over them. Or that if I was feeling depressed, I would also have a dark cloud over me. And we know that that's not realistic. It took me a while to like realize that, but we know that there are physical symptoms to anxiety and depression, things like headaches, stomach ulcers, feeling like constant nausea, chest pain. We know that people present to emergency rooms thinking they might be having a heart attack, but it's actually like chronic anxiety or an anxiety attack. We also know that there are behavioral changes, so people might start eating more than they usually do or not eating much at all. They may start sleeping a lot more than they usually do, or a lot less. They may start procrastinating or neglecting things they typically take care of. When we see physical changes in appearance, whether that be weight gain or weight loss, but also perhaps people who used to really take care of themselves, when we see that changing, if people are sort of neglecting their hygiene, those might be warning signs that somebody may be nearing crisis. There are also emotional signs, so people become perhaps more irritable than they typically are, perhaps short-tempered, they get agitated, they may find it very difficult to relax. They might start to isolate themselves. And this is really challenging because in agriculture, it is so easy to be isolated. And it's really easy to be isolated during stressful times when we may need people more than ever. And so we know what, the seasons of agriculture look like. And when people stop going to church, they stop engaging in high school football activity, like football games, for example, they stop going into their coffee shops or their restaurants. It's really easy for them to say, well, it's just a really busy time. And a lot of us might say, oh, that's right, it's planting season. But when we see people start to isolate, it's a really good opportunity to ask how they're doing, remind them that you've missed seeing them at X, Y, and Z, and that you really look forward to seeing them once the crop's in the ground. People may also start to feel really overwhelmed. I think it's a very common emotional response to stress. And when we think about all these signs, one thing I want you to keep in mind is that there are some people who maybe naturally don't sleep much. There may be people who are perhaps naturally sleep a lot. So we begin to worry about somebody when we see changes in normal behavior. And that's typically a change that lasts or persists about 2 weeks. And that's important to keep in mind because we talk about how we talk to people about our concern for them, being able to highlight changes in their physical appearance, perhaps in some of their behaviors or their emotions. It's really helpful to be able to say, I've noticed a change in X, Y, and Z. Because again, we're looking for changes or deviations from normal behavior that exist or should be persist for about 2 weeks. When we think about children, it's also really important to be watching for some specific signs. This may be a decline in school performance or a change in school performance. Perhaps new anxieties that emerge, maybe a sudden avoidance to school, avoidance of school activities, avoidance of peer activities, disinterest in friends, those sorts of things. New unexplained physical complaints. So this might be a chronic headache, chronic nausea, body aches, some of those physical conditions that we know are associated with mental health conditions. Again, changes in our habits, sleeping, eating, etc. And concerningly, an increase or propensity towards risk-taking behaviors, whether it be substance use, whether it be violence or violence-related activities. We have a paper out recently that describes risk-taking behaviors among farm youth. And unfortunately, we find an association between risk-taking behaviors, including like carrying a weapon, taking a weapon to school, participating in unsafe driving behaviors, and the association between anxiety and depression. So those are things that can become highly problematic, very concerning, and unfortunately tragic if we don't acknowledge those. One thing I really like about these training programs, and one thing I didn't want to have to wait until you have the opportunity to participate in one of them, is the programs really build skills. And I think one of the best skills they teach is around conversation starters. So how do we express concern? How do we start a conversation about mental health? Should we be worried about somebody? And there are some really great ways to do this. And then there are some maybe less recommended ways of doing this. One thing I always encourage is that we start by expressing concern. Hopefully we do genuinely care about the people we're talking to. But if I notice somebody in my family or my friends, they're starting to Perhaps they're more agitated than they usually are. Perhaps they're not as communicative as they usually are. I like to start those conversations by always leading with love. And so I typically say, I care about you. I'm really worried about you. And then I start to highlight changes in their behavior. So I say, again, I really care about you, but I've noticed you are X, Y, or Z. You're not, you never call me back. I have trouble getting you on the phone. You seem really irritated. You seem really almost aggressive right now. This is a change from what I've typically noticed. And then you can start to have conversations about, are you going through something? How is everything? I also think it's really good to normalize their feelings or experience. So for example, if it's spring, for example, and everyone's busy, trying to get a crop in, worried about prices, a really great thing to sort of do is normalize the situation. You can say, wow, it's been a long spring. I'm feeling really worn out. How are you managing? How are you dealing with things? Um, Exposing a bit of yourself and acknowledging that it's been hard on you opens the door for somebody to meet you and say, you know what, I've had a really tough time with this also, and I'm really just not doing great. We always want to validate someone's experience, and we want to be supportive without committing ourselves to something we may not be able to change. So, for example, I always like to ask how I can be supportive of somebody. I'm hesitant to say, how can I help? Saying, how can I help? You can't change the weather. You can't change commodity prices. You may not even be able to take 3 weeks off of your work to help with theirs, right? So we have to be really careful about what we get ourselves into sometimes. Asking how you can be supportive. Maybe it's you'll check in on them a little bit more. I'm going to text you tomorrow, see how things are going. I'm going to call you tomorrow night. Let's just to catch up. I'll be thinking about you. I'll be praying for you. Um, there are a lot of ways to be supportive without necessarily promising that you're going to do something or follow through with somebody. Um, I think a thing I really like about mental health first aid is that it teaches you how to ask about suicide, which is very important. We know that farmers are at high risk of suicide, but we know asking somebody, have you considered self-harm? Have you considered suicide is a really tough thing to ask. It's something I would encourage you all to practice asking it in the mirror because it can be very uncomfortable. And in acknowledgement of that, mental health first aid and some of these other programs provide a lot of space to practice having those conversations. And they really work on developing skills, practicing skills, so that people feel comfortable saying, I'm really worried about you. Have you considered hurting yourself or somebody else? And then making sure you know what you're going to do if somebody says, yeah, I have thought about that. Again, mental health first aid provides local resources, people you can call. So you can say, I'm going to connect you to X, Y, and Z. But I think it's really important to have some of those skills because unfortunately we don't always get to decide how somebody's going to respond to some of these questions, and we just want to be prepared and have our toolbox full of as many resources as possible. One of the other last things I'm going to talk about is social support. So social support and connectedness is so important to health. But we know that social support is difficult to find in ag communities. I've talked to a lot of farmers, I've talked to a lot of farm women who say it's really hard to find friends who understand what they go through. I recall a conversation I had with a woman a few years ago, and she said, I'm trying to make friends. I moved to this community to farm with my now husband. I'm trying to make friends, but a lot of people just don't understand that my schedule is not like their schedule. Or they say like, let's do book club or something, every month on this day, and they just don't understand that some months I'm not going to be able to make it, and they take it quite personally, and it becomes really challenging to build social connectedness. I've heard people say, it's easier for me to be friends with other small business owners because we understand sort of the ebb and flow of activity. We're very understanding that if plans change, if I have to cancel, it's not because I don't like them, it's just because something came up. But they may understand, again, the inconsistencies that life sometimes offers. We know that we've done some research in Illinois, and we know that women are less likely to report high levels of social support from friends and from their spouses, unfortunately, whereas men are more likely to report at least medium or high levels of support. And so we think it's really, really important, especially among farm women, to build social support, but it's something that can't be easily crafted. And so a question for the chat is, how can you show social support for others in your community? And I've had some people offer some really great tips or tricks around this. And I think it's changed a lot since COVID, unfortunately, where we're not popping in to maybe our neighbors like we used to. You know, I remember we used to make big platters of Christmas candies and cookies and drop them off at all our neighbors. And I don't know if that sort of thing is still happening. We used to trick or treat at all our neighbors, and we'd go around as a family. And we'd sit there for like 20 or 30 minutes at everyone's house and just talk and catch up. And I don't know if that's still happening. I hope it is. But I would be interested in, how you show support for your community, how other people show support for you. I had one person tell me that every time they make, they might be prepping freezer meals for spring or fall for those people that are in crop production. And they said, every time I make a freezer meal, I make an extra. And then I make a note that when I take it out of my freezer, I'm going to take it to my neighbors and say, hey, I was working on this project. I made these freezer meals. I want you to have these too. And then maybe 2 weeks later, I'm going to take another one over to my other neighbor. I've heard people talk about like co-oping for childcare. And so realizing that we are limited in some of our childcare options in agricultural communities. And so how can you take someone else's kids for a while so that they can be in the field or doing what they need to do, and then trading. And so maybe the next day or the next week, your kids will go to their space for a little while so that you can do something that you really need. You can't supervise children and get these things done. So there are opportunities like that, I think, for creative ways that we can show support for one another, take some of the perhaps like burden of all of this work off of ourselves, and hopefully build some community along the way. The last thing I'm going to talk about are professional behavioral health services. So there are a number of states in our region that are, and it's more than the ones that are highlighted here, that are offering low or no cost professional behavioral health services. These are typically available to anybody engaged in agriculture. So for example, Illinois has a program, it's a voucher program. Anybody involved in agriculture, farmer, rancher, banker, veterinarian, farm family member, can request 3 vouchers, and they can redeem those with one of our partnering providers. So there's information about each state's availability at farmstress.org. Some of these some of these programs operate like a voucher system where people get coupons that they can then redeem with one of their partnering providers in the state. That's how ours is in Illinois. I know that's how North Dakota is as well. South Dakota has a very similar program. Wisconsin runs their program out of the Department of Ag there. Missouri has partnered with their psych department on campus to provide telehealth therapies to farmers at no cost. And in Minnesota, I was so excited to hear Amanda mention Monica McConkey because I've been working with her a long time, and she is doing an amazing job in Minnesota. Minnesota has what I like to call the Ted and Monica model. That is, they have 2 state-based behavioral health specialists that can come to your farm, talk to you over the phone. You'll never be billed. They're paid by the Department of Ag to do and provide services to farmers. And I just think that is the most amazing model. I'm excited that other states are starting to explore that because it provides, like most of these programs, situational support. A lot of people need 3 to 5 sessions. There's a ton of evidence to suggest that 3 to 5 sessions is really beneficial for people who are dealing with the situation. We know that agriculture is very situation-based, and if we can get them through that challenge, the health outcomes are amazing. So there's a quote on here from somebody in Illinois who participated in our voucher program. He came up to me at a meeting and said, I am a proud voucher participant. I tell all my friends, anybody who's struggling, request vouchers and use them. It saved my marriage and maybe my farm. And so, again, farmstress.org has a number has an overview of all these different types of programs on each state's website. I would highly encourage you to take advantage of these. Totally free. I like to call it, it's like the Netflix model, sort of like a 7-day free trial. We're going to give you a free trial of therapy. You decide if it's right for you. In Illinois, you can re-request vouchers, so we're not cutting anybody off. But it's a great way to see if that sort of intervention is helpful. Now, as I mentioned, I acknowledge you may not all be joining us from the Midwest, but here are program leaders for the other farm and ranch stress assistance networks. The West, you can contact my friend Dawn if you have any questions about the programs and resources that are available there. Of course, I'm available from the Midwest. And then Catherine Un from the Young Farmers, National Young Farmer Coalition is leading the initiative up there. The South, if you are from one of the southern states, they're sort of between projects right now, but we'll have more information about that very, very soon. So with that, I wanted to leave a couple of minutes for questions. Thank you so much for being here. If you have any questions after the fact, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My email is listed here. I certainly want to acknowledge the National Children's Center for Rural and Agricultural Safety and Health. They fund our Farm Families Project. We have another year of that project, I should say another year of data collection happening or occurring here in the next couple of weeks. And then I want to acknowledge USDA NEFA for the Farm and Ranch Stress Assistance Network funding. So at that, I will open things up to questions, and then I think Amanda will see us out. Thank you so much for being here today. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Josie. That was really great. Just like she said, we've got a couple of minutes for questions. You are welcome to use the chat. You can unmute yourself. You can raise your hand. But now is a really great time to connect one-on-one with Josie and ask any questions you have. You may also private message me in the chat if you would like to ask something anonymously. Do we have any questions?
Jennifer, thank you so much for asking about Spanish resources. Yes, I will say Cultivamos out of the Northeast region has a website. They have probably set the bar in terms of the availability of Spanish resources. However, we have a growing number of resources available in the Midwest. Most of those can be found at farmstress.org. I can also say that I'll say this, the phone lines are all available that I've listed are all available in English or Spanish or additional languages, but English and Spanish at the very least. And then I do believe, I can't speak for all of them, but I know most of the behavioral health services are available in Spanish as well. So for example, in Illinois, we have a number of providers that can provide services in English or Spanish. And we have a lot of those Spanish recruitment materials also available. Excellent question. I see a lot of initiatives around making sure that our resources are available in languages other than English. And I think it's so important. And thank you for the question. And absolutely, farmstress.org has a number of resources available in both English and Spanish. And definitely check out Cultivamos. Like I said, they're very much setting the bar in terms of Spanish access.
Awesome. I see Laura has her hand raised. You can go ahead and unmute yourself, Laura.
Hi there. I have a question about compassion fatigue. So we talk a lot about the producers and today you did that as well. Producers, family, farmers, you know, that the nuclear family that is of course most affected, but then you have the veterinarians, the nutritionists, the crop consultants, the lender, the church, right, in the community, and so many people who are supporting people who are under stress. That has an impact on them too. So just if you could take a minute to just tell us what to look for in compassion fatigue from service providers who are like adjacent to farm families and how we can help them too, Josie.
Great question. And absolutely, you know, we think about, it's conversations we're having in this space a lot. Like we're asking veterinarians to obviously be a veterinarian, but then we're also saying, well, why don't you take these classes so that you can also be this sort of emotional mental support for your client? It's like, well, that's a lot. Like that's my job's already kind of big. And so to your point, we're certainly starting to acknowledge that that there's like a ripple effect to a lot of this stress. So yeah, perhaps the farmer's most impacted, but that doesn't mean that the insurance providers and the agronomists and the bankers and all these other people are not also experiencing some of this. So that's all the more reason we say no matter who you are, be trained in some of these programs, find a program to participate, build skills around mental health literacy so that regardless of who you are, you can have a conversation and offer support and hopefully referral to resources to anybody. I do feel like a lot of our materials are sort of we call them agricultural support. So those are extensions, bankers, veterinarians, etc., so that they can talk to farmers. I think we also need to be making sure that our farmers are participating in this program so that they can talk to the people showing up on the farm. We hope these are two-way, this communication is all two ways, and that we can build this massive capacity in the agricultural community to be supports for one another. So I think, when we talk about compassion fatigue, we have an FSA project right now. We're working to build skills, again, trying to build skills among FSA people so that they feel comfortable and confident talking to farmers about money, about all these other stressful situations. But the comments we're hearing from them is like, well, what about us? Like, this is a lot for us. And so our next step then is to think about how do we build systems and support to support the people who support our farmers. And so it's a huge question. But again, whatever we can do to build some literacy around mental health, regardless of who you are, and then feeling like every role, I should say, hopefully feeling confident in having conversations with anybody. And so, yeah, I might be the farmer, but if a veterinarian shows up to my farm and they're maybe not their typically bubbly self, do I have the skills to ask them, how they're doing? Do I feel compelled to be, an ally in their mental health? And so we're really hopeful that all these resources are, though they're, maybe focused on the farmer right now, we think about everybody in the ag system benefiting from them. It's a good question. It's a huge question, and compassion fatigue is, yeah, so real. I have a colleague who does work like me, and I asked them like, how are you doing? And they're like, I think I have compassion fatigue. And I thought, oh, can we have that? But yeah, we're talking about this constantly. We're hearing stories. Farmers are coming to us, and we're very much in the space to hopefully build resources. But we have to acknowledge, and everyone needs to, that they also have to prioritize their own mental health. And it's a fantastic question. Thank you for that. I wish I had like a really straightforward answer, but I think it's just building skills in every space we can.
Really good. Josie, if we can keep you for one more minute, there was one anonymous question in the chat I want to get to before we tie up for today. So the individual said, I love the idea of helping others with meals, etc., but sometimes I find I do this so much, but I am overextending myself. Any tips for not feeling that way when you are trying to help others, but maybe aren't getting that in return?
Oh, that is so challenging. Thank you so much for that question. And again, I think that I often think of mental health as not that I want us to think of it selfishly, but it's a little bit like the airplane. Like you have to put your mask on before you can help anyone else. And so I think having really strong boundaries, first of all, I would applaud you for willing to step up and take care of people in your community, even if you're not getting that sort of support back. So I think that's fantastic. And again, I really applaud that. And I'm really disappointed that people aren't reciprocating that, because I think that's what's really important. If we're going to have strong communities, we have to, again, it's a two-way street, right? And so I think, one thing you might consider is perhaps reevaluating. You don't have to be everything to everybody. And so perhaps reevaluating the people that you're expending your time to, perhaps exploring new spaces to find your social support. Being a single person in rural and agricultural communities, it is so challenging to find support. I can speak to that, but it might be that we have to sort of look in new spaces, in new places, to find people who maybe are more maybe have the time and the space for us. We also might consider what other people might be going through. If somebody was initially really supportive, able to show up for you in all the right ways, and they've sort of stopped, there might be more to them than perhaps you're aware of. But even so, I do think it's really important to prioritize your connection and the people you invest your time in before just continuing to deplete your resources entirely. But I will say one more time, like, I'm so impressed at your willingness to give to your community. I think that's a fantastic. But I also fully understand that you can't pour from an empty cup. And I think that's really, really important. I think a lot of us will extend ourselves beyond what we're able to give. And there is a time and a place to be really selfish with our resources.
Really good. There's one more question in the chat I really want to get to, and then we'll make sure to share Josie's contact info when you get the recording, so that if you do have anything else, you can follow up with her. But the question in the chat is, I feel like addiction is a form of mental illness, and it exists in the rural community and doesn't get talked about. What resources specific to AG are available to help support a loved one who is struggling in this way?
That is an amazing point. One thing we are just starting to talk about is substance use in rural communities. I think we all can probably acknowledge how ubiquitous alcohol use is, how it's sort of, I tell people alcohol is so challenging because if we have a really great day, we want to like celebrate with a cocktail. And if we have a really bad day, we like want to commiserate with a cocktail, and it creates a very complicated relationship with substances. Alcohol specifically there, but I'll be the first to say there are not great farm-specific resources available around substance use. Farmstress.org does have a number of more generic substance use and substance use disorder resources, but we have a lot of work to do in that space. And it's really complicated because, and I don't mean to get like political, but we see alcohol companies co-sponsoring a lot of farm or ag-related events. We go to the Farm Progress Show, and now there's like a beer tent. There's a lot of, big alcohol sponsors for some of our like major nonprofit organizations, and it creates a challenge in talking about substance use in and with agricultural communities. So I feel like, I'm not trying to say everything's on farmstress.org, but there are some substance use specific resources there. And I'd say that's a great place to start. We know that programs like AA and others exist in rural communities. A lot of church organizations support some substance use support groups. And if you have concerns about somebody and their substance use, I would also, depending on, all substances, I would definitely suggest talking to requesting that individual talk with their primary care provider. Primary care providers are very switched into some of the most local resources, hyper-local resources, for example, and resources that might be covered by insurance. And so you may feel like, well, this feels disjointed or maybe not relevant to my primary care provider. But I would encourage you to talk to your primary care provider about all things health related, mental health, physical health, etc., because they, again, are very switched into what sorts of programs are available through local clinics, public health organizations, and others in your community. Good question, and thank you for bringing that up. I don't think we talked about substance use at all, but it's a growing concern in ag communities for sure.
Yeah, thank you for that question too. And I want to build off of Josie's answer on that Stronger Together resource hub. There is also a limited number of resources regarding this as well. So between that and the website Josie shared, hopefully when it comes to online options, that will help guide you along the way.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, with that, thank you all for staying a little bit longer. And Josie, thank you for that incredible presentation and all of that info. This was really, really great. Just so you all know, you will get the recordings for both this webinar and the one that happened last week with Lauren in your inboxes soon. So if you need to catch up on any of those. And then also, again, thank you to Zoetis for providing the web hosting and recording of all of our webinars. With that, you'll get Josie's contact info, and I hope you all have a great weekend, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.